Hello, everyone. My name is Eran Aryeh, and I'm one of the members of the Leon Recanati Maritime Institute for Maritime Studies, actually. And I would like to open this first annual meeting that we are very honored to start a new tradition here. And I would like to ask Professor Asaf Yassur Landau, the head of the Institute, to start this meeting. Asaf, please. You are muted.
Thank you very much, Eran. Welcome, everybody, both on Zoom as well as on YouTube. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Please allow me to share the screen with you to show you some of our activities in the last year. The highlights of our activities were 16 field projects on land and sea. We've conducted only in 2022 more than 1,000 dives. The Institute have published more than 30 peer-reviewed articles for what was then 10 Institute members. Now we have more. And I think we have a small record of having 4 active ERC research grants, perhaps in unparalleled in the archaeology of Israel and elsewhere, and more than 13 other research grants. Now, in 2023, we have 14 members of our academic staff, and we hope that next year more will join this very nice and friendly and highly scientific group. For those who are not familiar with what we are doing, please visit our website. Everything that we do would not be possible without our fantastic administrative staff, Bracha Zimmerman, the administrative director, Laura Cohen, departmental coordinator, Dr. Meir Edri, our professional director, our dive officers, Moshe Bachar, diving and operation officer, and Amir Yuman, director of the Maritime Workshop, and our dear conservator, J.J. Gottlieb. In addition, we have 31 active research associates. 2, and I think more, are awaiting approval right now and enriching our ranks with their innovative research. What we have done in 2022 and moving into 2023 were training activities with the Maritime Workshop, scientific methods with Professor Deborah Zwickel in Akko, advanced work methods at sea, Dr. Emmanuel Nante, now Professor Emmanuel Nante, in Doren Caesarea, and our study excavation with Ruti Shachar-Gross and I at Dor. What we plan, really in a nutshell, for 2023, the remainder of 2023 and 2024, is an array of activities, including the excavation of the Roman harbor at Tiberias by Professor Emmanuel Nante. He will also embark on his new ERC project, ships harboring at ports, with numerous projects both in Israel and abroad. Professor Ruth Shachar-Gross will deal with the study of the provenance of stone anchors. We'll hear about it soon. And also developing mineralogy, geochemistry, and petrography of object biography. Also the publication of Dor South, early Bronze Age site, and the MB Dor Love Bay. Professor Guy Bar-Oz will begin and congratulations on his new ERC project, Boston Tree Bioarchaeology of Orchards and Sustainable Terroir in the Arid Near East, Trends in Ecology and Evolution that will revolutionize what we know about trees. Professor Gil Gambash will deal with a plethora of projects, including at Mitzpe Shivta, the study of Murex purple, the study of Caesarea submaritima. We'll hear about it more, as well as numerous other projects. Dr. Shlomit Bechar, that will also present today, will work on the Hatzor Lower City excavations and Atlit coastal excavations together with Dr. Shirley Ben-Dor Evian. Dr. David Frizam will continue his ERC project before the flood about Neolithic coastal settlements and responses to environmental dynamics, as well as other projects dealing with geoarchaeology. Dr. Eran Ariel, will hear about it more, will deal with the important Phoenician sanctuary at Tel Mahmish, as well as a corpus of Persian period Cypriot statuary from the southern Levant. I will work together with others at Kabri, at Dor, at Palmachim, together with Shirley Bendo, as well as hopefully in other sites during the coming year. Professor Debbie Zwickel will continue the publication of the extraordinary finds of the early Islamic period Ma'agan Michael shipwrecks, indeed a shipwreck full of miracles and unusual finds. Nimrod Marom will embark on numerous projects, including his ISF project of shipping ships about the movement of ships in and other animals across the Mediterranean, and his finishing of his ERC project of the ecology of the area of the Dead Sea, as well as numerous other projects in zooarchaeology and paleoecology. Dr. Shirley Bendov-Evian, in collaboration with the IAA and other people with the IAA, will work on the publication of the Palmachim cave, a real treasure trove of the late Bronze Age, perhaps an aristocratic or perhaps even a regal tomb of the 14th century BC. Dr. Dror Angel will work on numerous projects on sustainable aquaculture and his continuing studies of the jellyfish blooms and microplastics. Finally, our very own Dr. Meir Edrei, together with Dr. David Frizam, will work on the publication in collaboration with Professor Berbel Morstadt from Ruhr University, Bochum, Germany, on the publication of the beautiful Phoenician fortress at Khirbet Asuweda on the Carmel. A very remarkable project, our maritime workshop is continuing, is called Deep in My Heart. It is a voluntary project. It is an initiative of diving with autistic children, which continues now for a good number of years and really making a fantastic change. We are very ready for another year of continuing discoveries with all our members and our associate members, and we hope to share more with you this year and the next. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Asaf. And Nimrod, Professor Nimrod Marom will be our first chairperson for the first session. Nimrod.
Okay, thank you very much, and I'm very honored to chair this first session of this first annual meeting of the Recanati Institute. We are going to hear several 20-minute long lectures. Unfortunately, there will be no time for questions or comments following each lecture, but you are very much encouraged to take a look at the Recanati Institute's website, where you can find the email addresses of the researchers. If you have any questions, you can communicate directly. And without further ado, we will start with the first talk, Provenancing Bronze Age Stone Anchors, and it will be delivered by Sarah Maki and other co-authors of that research are Safia Sulanda, Ehud Galili, Nadia Deutsch, and Ruth Shachar-Gross. So go ahead, Sarah.
So I'll just share. Yes. Okay. Right. Hello, everyone. I'm glad you're all here. First, I want to say thank you to the conference organizers for inviting me to participate in the Recanati Institute first annual meeting. My name is Sarah Maki, and in this talk, I'm going to discuss some new directions I'm currently working on towards provenancing Bronze Age stone anchors. not clicking. Okay. So Bronze Age stone anchors, circa 2000 to 1200 BCE, are commonly found during underwater survey and excavation in the Eastern Mediterranean as part of shipwreck assemblages, harbor sites, and occasionally also within land archaeological contexts. Two of the most prevalent and typologically distinctive types of stone anchors are the Biblian and Uluburun type. They're attributed to the Middle Bronze Age and Late Bronze Age, respectively, based on their discovery within well-dated contexts on land and at sea. Generally, Biblian-type anchors are characterized by a triangular or oval top shape with a single round hole in the upper third of the anchor. Some have a groove carved from the hole to the top on one or both sides. And this type is identified to the MBA by finds in stratified contexts within the complex of the Temple of Obelisks in Byblos, Lebanon, as well as MBA harbor sites on the Red Sea, Ain Suhana and Mersa Goasis, whose main activity periods ranged from the 20th to the mid-18th centuries BCE. And in Israel, many anchors of this type have been found along the entire coastline, with large concentrations in the Carmel region. Anchors found at the late 14th century BCE Uluburun shipwreck are large rectangular stone slabs with one hole at their top, and I refer to this type as Uluburun due to the large number associated with the Uluburun shipwreck, and the later shipwreck site of Cape Galedonia, where a single large anchor of a similar shape was also found. On land, this type was first identified and named by Honor Frost as Ugaritic for their discovery at Ras Shamra, and later also by Frost to similarly shaped anchors from Cyprus at Kidian and Hala Sultan Teke. Late Bronze Age anchors are also common along the entire Israeli coast, when there are three primary variations: a elongated rectangle, a squat rectangle with rounded shoulders, and trapezoidal. The Uluburun type is also characterized by having either a square or rounded upper hole, which distinguishes them from the Biblian type, which have only round or conical holes. From the geological side, stone anchors are commonly made of carbonate rocks like limestone, chalk, or from aeolianites and beach rock. And the dominance of use of these materials poses a methodological difficulty for identifying their provenance. Because carbonate rocks occur throughout the Eastern Mediterranean basin, they cannot be easily separated into micro-regional origins. Aeolianites are also common along the entire southern Levantine coast. In Israel, these rocks are called Korkar and Rambleh in Lebanon. And in addition to these difficulties, there is considerable variability within the deposits themselves, and differences between Korkar and beach rock are also not often easily noticed. However, with detailed characterization of the rocks, we can identify subtle mineralogical, geochemical, and petrographic distinctions, which narrows down possibilities for their geographic origins. In our recently published article, we used these methods to study 4 assemblages of anchors from the LB and MB, and conducted geological sampling surveys of Korkar, beach rock, and carbonate rocks along the Carmel coast of Israel in order to compare with the anchors. In this study, I was able to work on a subset of several well-dated shipwreck assemblages with associated metal finds, as well as several individual anchors for a total of 17. 7 samples of MB Byblos type anchors and 10 samples of LB Uluburun type anchors were analyzed. The Carmel Ridge includes carbonate rock formations within a reasonably accessible distance of 0 to 5 kilometers from the coastline. However, to the south of the Tananim River, the carbonate rock outcrops are found only at a considerable distance inland, over 10 kilometers from the coast in some areas. And north of Haifa Bay, there are also no carbonate rocks close to most of the coast until the northernmost part of Israel at Rosh Nikra. The other rock types of interest, Korkar, beach rock, are readily available along the entire coastline. But as I said earlier, there can be significant variability among Korkars and beach rock, even in close proximity to each other, due to their formation processes. In Israel, the Nile littoral current cell system supplies the sediment, which composes the Kurkar. It begins at the Nile Delta and is transported to its terminus at Haifa Bay. And so these lithified dunes are comprised primarily of nilotic quartz, some lithoclasts, shell fragments, red algae, and some heavy minerals. But towards the north, the lithology changes. It becomes more calcite heavy as the quartz sand gets trapped in Haifa Bay. Beach rocks are coastal sedimentary formations composed of beach sediments that are rapidly cemented through the precipitation of carbonate cement. The cement is typically composed of calcite and or aragonite. It usually occurs in the intertidal, and it can incorporate sand and gravel and shells, and it can happen very quickly. Some recent beach rocks can even contain fragments of man-made materials like flint, ceramic shards, or even more recent objects. We find that Kurkar, beach rock, or more commonly used materials in late Bronze Age anchors, but less so in Middle Bronze Age Biblian type anchors, which are more commonly made of carbonate rocks. Which means that the Carmel Coast is the primary region in Israel with accessibility to carbonate rocks, aeolanites, and beach rocks. So to start, we used 3 microscopic and chemical analyses, including FTIR spectroscopy, stable carbon and oxygen isotope analysis, and thin section rock petrography. Our conclusions based on these analyses are that from Neve Yam, all 6 of the studied MB anchors were identified as chalky limestone, potentially originating from Carmel Coast Arkan Formation. The individual Biblian anchor from Atlit North Bay was also identified as a chalky limestone, potentially originating from the Carmel Coast Arkan. The LB Neve Yam anchor was identified as Kurkar or Ramleh, likely originating north of Haifa Bay. From Hishule Carmel, all 3 anchors were identified as chalky limestone, potentially from the Arkan or Isfie formations of the Carmel Coast. And from Kfar Samir, the anchors were found to be made of mixed materials, 2 identified as beach rock, 1 potentially Carmel Coast Kurkar, 1 likely northern Kurkar or Ramla, and 1 potentially Carmel Coast Isfie, and 1 of a yet unidentified source. So these were the results that we published based on the synthesis of the results from the 3 analyses. But now I'll discuss some preliminary results from work we are currently conducting with ICP-MS elemental analysis. In this plot of strontium and calcium oxide, the geological samples from the Carmel Coast contain close to pure calcium carbonate, which has a molecular weight of 56, and variations in the CaO concentration are affected by inclusion of other materials, such as clay. What is unexpected is the elevated concentration of strontium in all of the stone anchors compared to the Israel geological samples. So we want to know if either the elevated strontium is a quality of the source rock, that is, the anchors don't originate from Carmel Coast formations, or if the anchors experienced some kind of post-depositional diagenesis. This is an open question, and further sampling analyses are needed to clarify these results. But for the Kurkar and beach rock anchors, we find a strong negative correlation between calcium and silica. The increase in calcite and decrease in quartz sand from south to north is very clear, which supports our previous conclusions that the Kurkar or Ramla anchors were made north of Haifa Bay or even north of Rosh Nikra. From a different angle, the framework of object biography can be useful to examine archaeological objects at an individual scale, as well as to place that object within a context of social relationships. Because anchors are portable, they build a history through their circulation. And the idea is that by synthesizing the information from the anchor stones themselves, as well as their context, it could be possible to speak about the anchor's life, which includes aspects of chaîne operatoire, materiality, and the pre- and post-depositional life events. In some cases, anchors can move between several stages of life, as they're either physically transformed, for example, an anchor into a building stone, or perceptually, for example, an anchor into a monument. And these processes can also be reversed or occur in the opposite direction, for example, a monument into an anchor. During my recording process, I have identified two chisel types, which I refer to as type A and type B, and they both leave different markings on the anchors. Type A has a flat edge that makes elongated grooves with internal ridges representing a series of strikes. And in the 20 anchors I've recorded so far, I've also identified type A tools of two widths, a smaller one around 1.5 centimeters and a larger size around 2.5 centimeters. Type B tools leave individual teardrop-shaped gouges, and I've identified only one size of type B tool. Some anchors may have both or only one type of tool mark, and in some cases, the anchors are eroded so that no tool marks at all can be identified. The preservation of the marks I categorize into 3 qualities, and the qualities can be applied to both tool types. Quality 1 are best preserved. They have sharp angular marks with visible individual ridges, sharp edges. Quality 2 are medium well preserved. They have clear round marks with visible individual ridges, but they are smoother. And quality 3 are highly eroded. They're quite smooth and only the groove can be seen with no individual ridges. So, for example, this anchor belongs to the Neve Yam Biblian shipwreck assemblage. It's currently located in an outdoor display at the Maritime Museum in Haifa. This anchor is made of chalk. The rock contains no observable macrofossils, but it does contain a vein of calcite which runs across the body of the anchor near the hole. This vein is approximately 2 to 3 millimeters thick and it cuts through the entire stone, which was apparently not considered detrimental for its carving or use as an anchor. In the shaping process, there's evidence for use of only type A tools, but we can see 2 different sizes of marks as well as different angles of the cuts. By examining the hole, we can see tool marks of quality 1, suggesting that if this anchor was connected to a rope, the use time was not long enough to abrade the tool marks. The smoothness on the back side of the anchor is likely a result of this side of the anchor laying on the sea bottom and becoming abraded by the movement of the sand beneath it, like a sandpaper. All of the color changes and surface scars are products of events that took place after its retrieval from the sea. And we can see evidence of this recent handling as abrasion marks, which have fresh surfaces, and the black discoloration that covers the top and front of the anchor is bacteria or mold or lichen, resulting from its outdoor display location where it's exposed to rain. On this anchor, the transition of areas of quality 1 marks to quality 2 coincides with these black patches. This weathering process occurred over the span of approximately 12 years, which is when the anchor was set up on display outside the museum, along with the other anchors of this assemblage. And as it stands now, environmental elements will continue to erode and change the anchor's surface. So, in conclusion, ICP-MS elemental analysis raises some new questions regarding the carbonate rocks and carbonate rock anchors, which were previously identified as being produced from local Carmel Coast rock formations based on the work that we previously published. However, the elemental analyses did further reinforce our conclusions about the Korkar and beach rock anchors being produced from a source north of Rosh Nikra. And so, future work is planned to try to answer the question about the source of the strontium in the stone anchors, including additional geological sampling in the Galilee and an upcoming trip to Cyprus to test whether these outlier compositions might originate there or in fact is a result of post-depositional change. For the anchor biographies, we can see it's possible to follow the entire life of the anchor from production to its recollection. And another interesting aspect of these biographies is a greater understanding of some of the consequences of recent handling and display. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. You can unshare your screen, please. Thank you. Really interesting. And we will proceed to Rana and is a paper on the rediscovery of the Phoenician sanctuary of Mahmish, or Tel Michal. Please, Ran.
Can you see it in a presentation mode?
Yes.
Can you see it well?
I can. It's not in the presentation mode right
Okay.
now. It's in the regular mode.
Okay. Now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So this paper presents a preliminary study of the forgotten excavations of Nachman Avigad at the Phoenician sanctuary of Mahmish, Tel Michal. Tel Michal is located in the central coastal plain of Israel on the southern coast of the modern city of Herzliya. It is situated within a geographic framework defined by the Mediterranean Sea to the west, Wadi Glilot to the north, and endless dunes to the south and east. The site has an irregular form comprising 5 separate components that cover areas of different shapes, heights, and sizes. The high tel is rather small, only 3 dunams, and was inhabited from the Middle Bronze Age to the early Islamic period. The northern hill, which is the biggest part of the site, spreads over 40 dunams. It was mainly settled during the Persian period, and its northern part was used as a cemetery. 3 additional hillocks are located farther east, 2 to the south of the high tel, and the third 400 meters to its northeast. This last is the focus of this paper. Excavations of Tel Michal were conducted by Professor Zev Herzog from Tel Aviv University from 1977 to 1982 in all parts of the site, except for the northeastern hillock. In addition, as part of the construction of the nearby marina, salvage excavations of the northern hill were carried out by the Israel Antiquities Authority in 1993 and 1996, the former in cooperation with Professor Herzog. All of these excavations were fully published and serve as the main sources for understanding the history of the site and the central coastal plain of Israel. The subject of this paper is the only excavation ever conducted on the northeastern hillock, the size of which is about 2 dunams. This scientific excavation followed a massive robbing. 2 brothers, German Jews who were known to the staff of the Haaretz Museum in Tel Aviv, were responsible for the looting after military maneuvers that took place in the site. The looters eventually handed over part of the objects to the Department of Antiquities, but with the department's approval, kept the rest. Part of it they later donated to the Haaretz Museum, but the present location of some of the looted objects is still unknown. In any event, 2 excavation seasons were carried out here in 1958 and 1960, directed by Professor Nachman Avigad, on behalf of the Haaretz Museum with the cooperation of the Department of Archaeology of the Hebrew University. Although more than 60 years have passed, only 2 short preliminary reports were published by Avigad, and the rich finds appear to have been forgotten. The archival material of the excavation, as well as most of the finds, were recently located after countless efforts, and they are now studied in preparation for a final report. However, I would like to invite anyone who is listening to kindly share knowledge regarding additional documents or finds associated with this site. Your contribution would be greatly appreciated. Since the Arabic name of the entire site was Mahmish or Da'arat Mahmish, Avigat decided to call the northeastern hillock in his publications Mahmish, although the Hebrew name Tel Michal already existed. This has led to considerable confusion regarding the precise location of his excavation, which became even more pronounced after the publication of the excavation results as two distinct articles in the Encyclopedia of Archaeological Excavations in the Holy Land. As aforementioned, the northeastern hillock is an integral part of Tel Michal, but in order to reduce further confusions, I decided to call it Mahmish and in brackets Tel Michal. 3 strata were defined by Avigat in his excavations. The lowermost, stratum 3, comprised a 10 by 10 meters mud brick structure that was securely dated to the Iron Age 2A. Stratum 2 from the Persian period will be discussed at length immediately, and the uppermost Hellenistic period stratum 1 consists of an open large area paved with flagstones. Avigat interpreted all 3 strata as being related to cultic activities. In fact, the real nature of strata 3 and 1 should be re-examined, but this is beyond the scope of this paper. The Persian period Phoenician sanctuary of stratum 2 was located at the western part of the hillock. The plan of the sanctuary was never published and is presented here for the first time. Its main axis is oriented north-south. The entrance is positioned toward the east in common with various other cultic buildings in the southern Levant in different periods. The 2 phases of construction that were distinguished in the sanctuary demonstrate a strong architectonic connection with each other, suggesting that they are close in date. No evidence of the western wall of the sanctuary has been discovered in either phase. Only the eastern side of the building was preserved. In both phases, a large open courtyard extended to the east of the sanctuary. Excuse me. The early sanctuary consisted of a single hall measuring 9 by 6 meters. The outer face of the eastern wall was plastered, and a wide, well-built doorway with ashlar jambs was located in its center. In front of the door, a patch of the floor was paved with thin slabs of stone. Moreover, the hall itself was stone paved, as attested by some remnants of pavement. During the construction of the later phase, the hall was expanded northward by 2.5 meters, and an additional rather small side room was added to the building farther north. The total width of the building was now about 15 meters. Various stratigraphic factors indicate that the hall and the side room were not aligned. The hall was approximately 1 meter longer than the room. The hall remained paved, but with bigger flagstones. Only its northeastern part was preserved. During this later phase, 2 large plaster basins were constructed in the eastern courtyard. While the southern one was built on the floor, the other was sunk into the floor, probably in relation to a long, well-preserved open plastered drain more than 5 meters in length that was uncovered to its east. The plans of both the early and the late sanctuaries are well rooted in the architectural tradition of the southern Levant. Similar cultic structures were uncovered from the late Bronze Age through at least the Hellenistic period. The rich pottery assemblage has not yet been processed, but after briefly going over all the material, I can say that it is mostly made of shared material. Only very few complete vessels were uncovered. Moreover, most of the pottery is coarse plainware, presumably from the southern Levant in general and its coastal plain in particular. The assemblage includes only a small quantity of imported pottery, mostly mortaria bowls and basket handles amphoras from Cyprus. Attic imported material and Greek amphoras are scarce. Anyhow, the analysis of the pottery will provide valuable insights, allowing for a more precise dating of the sanctuary within the Persian period. The most surprising and rewarding discovery was an assemblage of more than 250 clay figurines, only some 15 of them published in the past. Moreover, hundreds of fragments of figurines still await research. Hence, one should refer the following discussion as preliminary. Many of the figurines were found in the sanctuary itself, while others were retrieved in the courtyard or were looted before the excavations. Thus, their exact context is unknown. In any event, of the 266 classifiable figurines, only 12 are not dated to the Persian period, but are Hellenistic and probably originated in stratum 1. Thus, the remaining 254 figurines are all related to the Persian period sanctuary of stratum 2. By all accounts, this is the most extensive assemblage of clay figurines ever discovered in relation to a single structure in Israel from all periods. Notably, more than 85% of the Persian period assemblage can be easily identified as Phoenician figurines of the mold-made hollow type. Only few examples can be defined with certainty as coming from afar, mostly from southern Israel and Cyprus, while others merit further investigation. A petrographic research recently initiated by Dr. Paula Weiman-Barak will provide evidence for manufacturing techniques and circulation. While the figurine assemblage includes different types of men, women, children, and animals, most of it consists of men and women. The general distribution of the types reveal a near balance between men and women, and together they constituting more than 70% of the assemblage. Actually, the figurines that cannot be clearly identified with a specific gender should be included to this category, since their precise categorization was not possible only due to their state of preservation. Consequently, the combined group of men, women, and those with ambiguous gender constitutes more than 85% of the entire assemblage. The most frequent types in the entire assemblage are the enthorn bearded men and the pregnant woman, frequently referred to as Deateria gravida, including a version of her holding a baby. Each of these types has different subtypes that will be easily defined in the future, as many of the specimens are complete. More importantly, while only about 70 enthorn bearded men and 140 Dea gravida figurines were ever reported throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, in Machmish alone, there are about 75 figurines of enthorn bearded men, and additional 80 examples of the Dea gravida. These numbers are not only incredible in relation to the overall known quantities of these types elsewhere, but also concerning Machmish itself, where they form more than 60% of the entire large assemblage. Their abundance in Machmish and the fact that the gender frequencies are almost equal must have a crucial importance regarding the identification of the deities worshipped in this sanctuary. Two large assemblages of Persian period figurines from the northern coastal plain of Israel can be used as comparable material, Shavei Tzion and Dor, even though the 300 figurines from Shavei Tzion still await final publication. They seem to have a completely different character. Almost all of them are of women, some representing the goddess Tanit, who does not appear in Machmish. Moreover, the worshipper figurines with raised right hand, which are so frequent in Shavei Tzion, are very scarce in Machmish. The Dor assemblage portrays a much varied collection of figurines. Almost a quarter are of a horse and rider, in contrast to the very few specimens in Machmish. In addition, women figurines account for approximately 25 of the overall assemblage, while in Machmish they account for, as discussed before, more than 40%. These differences reflect cultic diversity in southern Phoenicia during the Persian period. Although mostly from the Hellenistic period, the rich figurative finds from the Favista of Harayed can also be compared to the figurine assemblage from Machmish. Here again, a clear contrast can be observed between the two assemblages. Representations of children are the most frequent type in Harayeb, probably expressing the temple's role in children's health and well-being and in adolescents' rite of passage. This, for sure, was not one of the main functions of the sanctuary of Machmish. In addition to the clay figurines, some 20 Cypriot limestone fragments of statuettes were also part of the offerings that were found at Machmish, almost all of them never published before. This group constitutes the second largest collection of Cypriot statuary ever found at a single site in the southern Levant. The only larger collection is that of 27 statuettes excavated by Bliss and McAllister in the Favisa at Tel Safigat. Remarkably, the total number of statues of this Cypriot type that have been unearthed in modern Israel is approximately 90, with only the groups from Tel Safigat and Machmish constituting over half of this collection. In common with most of the statues uncovered in Cyprus and the group found in Israel, the statues from Machmish are also mostly of male votaries. However, they also include two Egyptianized figures, a temple boy, a crowned female possibly representing a deity, a fragment that may be of Heracles, and a female votary. In addition to the clay figurines and Cypriot statuary, other rich finds were unearthed at the sanctuary, such as an Egyptian statuette, small cubical altars, alabaster vessels, bronze jewelry, glass pendants, faience and bronze figurines, fragments, and agate and carnelian large beads. These abundant finds will greatly contribute to our understanding of the sanctuary's connection to the outside world and will shed light on its function and significance. Numerous questions can be raised as a result of this brief and preliminary survey. Why was the Machmish sanctuary constructed on this rather isolated hillock? Was it a sanctuary that guarded the city and was supposed to be the first edifice to be seen when approaching it? Was it a cult place for the dead buried in the nearby cemetery, and could it have been related to Morzeach? Was it linked to a yet unknown anchorage that was located in the adjacent Wadi Glilot and that had a maritime aspect? Moreover, who were the deities worshipped here? Was it a single god or goddess, or perhaps a divine couple, as may be hinted by the figurine assemblage? The only inscription retrieved from the sanctuary hillock was actually uncovered long after Avigad's excavation had concluded. It was in 1987 that a non-archaeologist visitor to the site found two adjoining pottery sherds of a Persian period crater with the remains of 5 letters that were incised below the vessel's rim. The late Anton Rainey published it as a Phoenician inscription that reads, belonging to Baal Shamayim. Consequently, he suggested that the very frequent and torn bearded men figurines that were uncovered here were representations of the god Baal Shamayim, the Lord of Heaven. However, only 2 years after his publication, André Lemaire referred to the inscription as Aramaic rather than Phoenician, and moreover claimed that it is not a dedication to the god, but probably a personal name, Baal Shema or Baal Shemer. If this suggestion is true, the inscription should be interpreted as the name of the owner of the crater, which probably contained an offering to the sanctuary. This highlights once more the challenges encountered in determining the deity's worship in this sanctuary. Although the research presented here is only taking its first step, the good preservation of the sanctuary, its well-established plan, and the rich figurative and ceramic assemblages all make Machmish one of the best laboratories for the study of Phoenician cult during the Persian period. Hence, in addition to the project of publishing Avigad's excavation, future dig is also planned here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eran. And we move forward to the talk about Caesarea Submaritima. and it will be carried out jointly by Gil Gambash and Ehud Arkin Shalev. Please.
Thank you, Nimrod. You can hear me well, right? Very good. And in a second, we are going to have the shared screen of Udi. Yes, we're good. Not yet in presentation mode, Udi. This is it. Very good. So many thanks for the organizers. Many thanks, Nimrod. And congratulations to our institute for what promises to be a long and happy tradition in this gathering. It is great to be here. Many thanks for the invitation. And out of the several projects that we are looking at, we thought that it would be appropriate in such an institute to introduce a new project that is just now taking baby steps towards a fuller realization of the concept that looks at Caesarea Maritima underwater, and particularly at the harbor of Sebastos, hence the title Caesarea Sub-Maritima. And whenever I return to revisit this site, which I've been partly obsessed with for the last decade, I find that it is wise to begin with elephant parables. Udi, elephant parables. There you go. The first one is the white elephant. Those of you who know some of the state of the field for Caesarea Maritima know that at least I'm trying to lead a suspicious line of looking at its functionality as something that was too much, too extravagant, too big, too costly to preserve and maintain, hence a white elephant. Others may have their own opinions, and in order to conduct this debate intelligently and knowingly, we need information, we need a holistic picture. But then once again, we are tackled by another elephant, that is the elephant that is being felt by a bunch of blindfolded sages, myself included, each of them seeing or feeling another part of that elephant. And this is something that many of you who are looking at complex systems would sympathize with. This is not just the way Caesarea was built or the way it was destroyed. It is not just the textual evidence. It is not just a tsunami wave. It is not just tectonics. And it is in order to produce this bigger picture, holistic, of a complex system that would allow not only myself, not only Udi, but many others to return and ask more intelligently questions about the nature of this site, that we came up with the idea of Caesarea Sub-Maritima. And to complete the elephant parables, we believe that these are two elephants in the room that we must talk about, definitely in an institute such as the Recanati Institute for Maritime Studies. So we're trying to bring Caesarea back to the stage. And the definition of the project, as it is just now coming to be, begin with the goals that are to retrace the harbor's history on a resolution which is far higher than ever available before. This partly also thanks to technology that makes it now available. To correlate this history with that of the city and the broader region for which it served as a cultural, administrative, and economic center, and thus by employing the methodology of delineating by means of virtual archaeology above all, so we are not really excavating, the processes of the physical deterioration of Sebastos, and to map the reasons, natural as well as human, for its decline. So it is function on the one hand, and decline and collapse on the other hand. What we expect this project to achieve in terms of its research outcome is firstly a high resolution picture of the functionality of the harbor through time. Again, something that will be a service to the community. The means to discuss holistically aspects of causality for the collapse of the structure. The tools to study and analyze the Mediterranean aspects of the economy of Caesarea and of the southern Levant more broadly. We all know what important part this harbor may have played in the region, white elephant or not, and the added significance of offering a reliable plan and narrative on which future projects of heritage, preservation, and museology may rely, especially because of the fact that most of this site is submerged underwater and is not available to the audiences. Two projects that we came familiar with recently and actually had been launched and one of them completed quite recently were conducted by our colleagues from the University of Malta, headed by Professor Timmy Gambin, Maya South-Mekat from Heritage Malta, and John Wood, who does the technological parts. One of them is the Taurek site off the island of Gozo near Malta. And this is the site that you see here as part of a new exhibition on Malta's virtual museum, only 2 days ago coming online. And I encourage all of you to visit this particular site and of course the virtual museum as a whole, which gives all of us a lesson about virtual museology and presentation of sites that are not accessible to the audience. This site is 100 meters underwater, and the encouraging thing in it is that it is vast in terms of scope. It is hundreds of meters on hundreds of meters, strewn with amphorae of various sorts, and maybe not even just one shipwreck, but perhaps more. The ability of the team in Malta to cover this area efficiently and in high resolution is one encouraging point. And another one is a second project that had been completed last year, the one that looks at the Azure window of Malta. This is once again in the island of Gozo. On the right-hand side, you can see this natural structure, arch, they call it a window, as it was photoed through the years A, B, and then C, until in 2017, it collapsed into the water. And then a team headed once again by Timmy Gambin and Professor Caruana from Malta produced the photogrammetric model on the left that is once again three-dimensional and interactive, which was able to retrace backwards the collapse processes and the reasons for them. So once we saw that, we thought Caesarea would be a challenge that perhaps technology now can allow us to tackle. And we made two phone calls. Firstly, to the Institute of Maritime Studies, asking if it is possible to support such a project logistically. And you can imagine that the answer was, as always, an enthusiastic yes. And the second one was to the Haifa Center for Mediterranean History, where we physically formed the research cluster that is going to look, hopefully in the next few years, into this project. Firstly, allowing us to invite Dr. Udi Arkin as a postdoctoral fellow, bring the team from Malta for an initial proof of concept experience. And now I'm turning you to the trusted hands of Dr. Arkin to show you what we've done here in Caesarea during this visit of the Maltese team. Udi, s'il vous plaît.
All right. Thank you, Gil. So can you see and hear me after a fashion?
Yes.
Right. Good. So, reviewing our results from the initial phase of our research. As many of you are no doubt familiar with, the harbor of Sebastos, constructed in the later part of the 1st century BCE, consists of 3 basins. The outer basin, which was constructed in the open sea and is protected or was protected by 2 breakwaters. The southern breakwater, 650 meters long, and the northern breakwater, 250 meters long. The remains of which both breakwaters are now completely submerged underwater. Then, east of the outer basin was a middle basin built on a coastal Aeolianite ridge that utilized a natural bay in the area when is now partly incorporated into the modern bridge. And then finally, an inner basin, which is completely silted and landfilled. Our research currently focuses on the entrance area of the harbor. Is my pointer visible?
Yes.
Amazing. So the entrance area of the harbor, right here, including these two circles. And our choice to begin there was influenced by the crucial role of the entrance in the operation of Sevastos, serving as it does as a bottleneck that regulates the flow of ships, goods, and people. Now, in this area are the entrance channel itself, right here, visible in the satellite photo, and column bases situated outside the channel's western extremity, shown here. Both were referenced briefly by Josephus. At the harbor mount stood colossal statues, 3 on either side, resting on columns. Those on the right, of vessels entering port, supported by 2 upright blocks of stone clamped together. Now, previous research by Rabban, Hoffelder, and others has left us with important questions regarding the harbor entrance's dimensions, design, construction, functions, and chronology, all of which we aim eventually to shed light on. Now, with your permission, I'll move to a different shared screen. All right. Can you see a 3D model?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. So this is part of our initial results, which were the outcome of pre-planning and preparation, which lasted several months and involved much international groundwork, and then 2 days of preparation dives, and then finally 1 long day of documenting underwater. The data acquired during this 1 day took about a week to process, requiring both automated and manual inputs. Now, what you see here is a 3D model of the entrance channel underwater to the harbor. And just for scale, right, at its narrowest, it is 6 meters wide, right here. Right? The bottom depth is about 9 meters. Right? If we turn it this way, north would be towards the top of the screen, of your screen. Right? And what we are able to see is the northern breakwater at its western extremity, right here. And this is the southern breakwater near its northern extremity. Now you might note the ability to automatically identify and delineate objects in high resolution, including hewn aeolianite blocks right here, delineated by software, as well as parts of the rubble spill. If we zoom in, it is actually able to tell apart pieces of rubble, and architectural items which were lost on the breakwater, such as these column drums here and what may be a stone anchor or two here. Now, the reason for the holes in the model, these artifacts, are simply that when diving and working underwater, we actually overextended our planned survey boundaries and thus generated a greater amount of data than we originally planned, and which we inserted into the model. Now, the construction of the breakwaters at Sevastos presents intriguing contrasts in terms of techniques and collapse patterns. The western extremity of the northern breakwater is composed of large hewn stone blocks which measure up to 3 meters in length. These blocks have shifted and slid towards the west over time. Now, in contrast, the southern breakwater appears as an extensive rubble spill, lacking any distinct architectural features. These observations raise interesting questions about the different construction phases and their implications for the overall design and functionality of the harbor. Just as an example, a hypothesis by Rabban and Hoffelder assigns the rubble spill to possible early 6th century renovation attempts by Anastasius to reconstruct the mole covering the remains of the earlier structure. Based on this hypothesis, Rabban put the width of the harbor entrance channel at about 25 meters. Hoffelder, relying instead on the location of concrete blocks which form the head of the breakwater, places the estimated width of the channel at 85 meters, not 25. Now we, at this time, only choose to point out the immense implications this difference has in the understanding of the harbor entrance's design and function, underscoring the need for further research. I move on to the second model produced. Can you see this new model?
Yes.
Thank you. Right.
And
Now,
we have 5 more minutes, Udi.
excellent. So, according to Josephus, colossal statues adorn the columns on the right side of the harbor entrance, welcoming incoming ships. Now, our second 3D model indicates that the columns measure about 6 meters by 6 meters. So this is 6 and this is 6. And they stand about 6 meters tall above the sea floor, which is at 9 meters depth. They are clearly dissimilar one from the other, as you can see when we turn the model. Right. Nor do they appear to fit Josephus's description of being clamped together. Okay. Now you might note the presence of bivalves, all these little bumps which completely cover the 2 column bases. These are the bivalve spondylosphenosis, right? And this model, along with the software's ability to provide size, coverage, and volume estimations of these bivalves, offer an opportunity for collaboration with marine biologists wishing to explore the interaction between artificial structures and the marine environment throughout the ages. All right. We can get to another shared screen. Last one. All right. Now, what we've done is we've integrated our models, right, and the data from previous research, which allows us to leverage past results within our work. We begin with a satellite image of Caesarea in which the 2 breakwaters are clearly visible. On this, we georeference aerial imagery from the 80s, which allows us to see spillage and collapse not visible today because it's covered in sand. Now, this ability to track the movements of sand and sediment over time is actually crucial in understanding the wave energy patterns within the harbor and identifying factors which influenced the construction and design of the harbor or which were missed. To this, we add an area map of the different areas surveyed and excavations by past researchers and the KHAP project, allowing us to correlate our work with that of our predecessors. Now, we can put in our own models, visible here and here. These are actually digital elevation maps, static, constructed from the 3D models, which will be later replaced by dynamic 3D elevation maps. Zooming in, I think we can get a sense of scale for both the harbor itself, huge as it is, and the size of the work ahead of us. All right. Just to conclude quickly this part, so our preliminary insights gained from our research at the entrance of the harbor provide a valuable foundation for the understanding of the design, function, and construction of the entrance. The contrasting features observed in the breakwaters and columns challenge existing hypotheses and emphasize the need for further investigation. And by integrating data and technology and fostering interdisciplinary collaborations, we do aim to unravel the complexities of Sevastos and deepen our knowledge of the ancient harbor system. I think back to you, Bill.
Only in order to thank you, Udi, for a marvelous presentation and thank the audience We are open for questions and volunteers. Find us. Thank you, Nimrod.
Thank you very much, Gil and Udi. And we move forward to the last talk in this session by Dr. Shirley Bendor-Evian on the role of art and artists in Egyptian society of the first millennium BC, the evidence from polychrome painted coffin lids in the Israel Museum. Please share.
Thank you, Nimrod. Can you see my presentation in the presentation mode? Good. Okay. And now to something completely different, as we used to say. So thank you, everyone, for organizing this and for inviting me. And I'm new to the Institute, so you say it's the first time. I think you'll always have this, and it's very impressive. Before I came to this Institute, I was a curator at the Israel Museum. And when I arrived at the Israel Museum in 2016, I was very much surprised to see in the storage of the Egyptian Archaeology Department, these two guys staring at me. Before I saw this in the Israel Museum, I thought that if you wanted to see original wooden anthropoid, fully painted Egyptian coffins, you need to go to the Louvre or the British Museum or the Cairo Museum. I had no idea we had them in Israel. A quick check in the archives and the database of the museum told me that these were donated to the museum in 1982 by the Tish family, who were the purchasers of the Dayan collection. As you can see from this initial photo, they were very dirty. And the first thing we did was transfer them to the Organic Materials Conservation Lab at the Israel Museum, with a very nice research assistant there in the elevator. And while they were being cleaned and preserved and conservation work was done, I had a chance to think about a new research project. The aims of such a research project would be first and foremost to publish the coffins because they were completely unknown to the scientific community. The second was to understand what kind of workshops were behind these masterful works of art, and can we identify specific workshops or artists in this context? The last aim was to talk about these artists and these craftsmen and what were their social status, what were their roles and impact in the Egyptian society. The ISF willingly granted us a personal grant, and we could start to work. As far as provenance was concerned, my first attempt was with this guy here. You see him already nice and clean, so it's possible to see the beautiful decorations. Typologically, this is a coffin from the late period, so dating to at least 500 to 330 BCE. This is indicated by a few typological attributes like the very wide collar that we see here, the pedestal at the bottom of the coffin lid, and the image of the goddess Nut here on the upper part. Having realized that this is a late period one and consulting colleagues, I had some luck and I could find that this guy was sold in auction in Christie's in 1971. So it was already on the antiquities market early in the 1970s. Additional help from the digging skills of our host, Eran Aryeh, in the archives of the Israel Museum revealed that it was purchased by Arthur Sackler in October 1975 in New York, and then it was donated to the museum. However, since 1975 was before the opening of the Egyptian department in the Israel Museum, it was decided that it would be housed temporarily at the house of Dayan, and subsequently it was transferred to the Israel Museum after his death in 1982. So I had a little bit more information about the provenance of this artifact, and then I could also read the inscription and know who the coffin owner was. The beautiful Osiris Ptah-Hotep. So Osiris is just the name you add to someone who died. So his name is Ptah-Hotep. son of Horweja, born to the lady of the house, the son of Shepenasit. Unfortunately, the popularity of the name Ptahhotep in ancient Egypt is somewhat similar to the popularity of the name Avi in Israel. So that didn't help us a lot. This is, at this point, what we can say about the esteemed Ptahhotep. Part of the publication required meticulous and detailed hand drawing of the coffin in order to really understand and analyze the process of the decoration, as well as the scenes themselves on the coffin. And that was done by Mikhail Smolansky from the Israel Museum. The rest of my talk will be devoted to this second coffin, what we call the yellow coffin, on which some more work has been done. In the sense of typology, it belongs to a class, a very well-known class of Egyptian coffins, the yellow coffins, and a specific type, type 5, distinguished by the wide floral collar, by the composition of 2 lines here of text and 4 horizontal lines of text, and the entire area in the middle devoted to scenes of worship. And this kind of coffin is typologically dated to the late 21st dynasty and the early 22nd dynasty, so about 950 BCE. The beautiful thing about yellow coffins of the 21st dynasty is that most of them belonged to members of priestly families. And so we could read, after it was cleaned, the name of the lady of the house, chantress of Amun-Re, king of the gods, Jedmut. Jedmut from the priestly family, that immediately tells us where we have to go to find the provenance of this coffin, because the temple of Amun-Re, where she would have been a chantress, is in Thebes. And indeed, on the other side of the Nile, in present-day Deir el-Bahri, in the temple of Hatshepsut, a great find of coffins of the 21st dynasty was found in 1891. It included a cache of 153 burial sets of priests and priestesses of Amun from the 21st dynasty, more than 4,000 objects. And due to a lack of space in Egypt to store and present all this riches, it was all distributed among over 90 museums worldwide. And this is why a lot of small museums, including the Israel Museum, have ended up with coffins, yellow coffins from the 21st or even 22nd dynasty. Unlike Ptahhotep, the name Jedmut is a little bit less popular. And we have among these yellow coffins of the 21st and 22nd dynasties, several attestations of the name. Particularly, 2 coffins stand out. One is the one you see here from the Vatican Museum. It was received at the museum in 1838, so before the big cache in Deir el-Bahri. And it's exactly of the same type as the Jedmut coffin from the Israel Museum. And another coffin exists in a museum in France, La Rochelle, a natural history museum, again, received at that museum in 1869, so before the royal cache, the cache in Bab el-Gassus in Deir el-Bahri. Here we see the 2 of them together, the coffin from La Rochelle and the coffin from the Israel Museum. They really show quite a lot of similarity in the typology and in the size. And if we look at the dimensions, we see that the coffin from the Vatican of Jedmut is considerably larger than the coffins of Jedmut from La Rochelle in the Israel Museum, who are almost the same size. And this indicates to us that at least one of these coffins was an outer coffin and the other was an inner coffin. And the Egyptians, since the 20th dynasty, tended to bury their elites in a nesting of coffins, putting one inside the other. So obviously one would be larger. So the question here now is if there is a connection between all these Jedmut coffins, and the Vatican Museum coffin is the larger one, so it would be the outer coffin. Which of these two should be the inner coffin? One of the early questions that arose during our project. The Vatican has initiated in 2016 a global coffin project together with the greatest museums in the world in order to retrieve all the lost data from all these coffins that were circulating in museums since they were shipped out of Egypt in the 19th dynasty. The amount of data that these coffins contain is huge about people, about history, about the burial grounds, about the objects in the funerary complexes, about the materials and the technologies they were made of. And in 2017, we were able to present our coffins from the Israel Museum and join this project. And that's a great joy. Moving on to the question of workshops, which is part of the Vatican Coffin Project, we can see that this particular coffin of Jedmut belongs to a very specific type that was popular in Thebes for about 50 years at the beginning of the 10th century. And we have about 200 examples of them in the world. You can identify them by the bands that you see here in the middle, the red bands, that are an imitation of these bands that tie together the wrappings of the mummy. So what we have is about 200
Hi, everyone. I think we have a technical problem with Shirley. She will try to connect in a second. For an unknown reason, she was... oh, Iri, where are you?
I'm back.
Okay.
Hang on. Okay, do you see it?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
Okay. So as I said, this is a wonderful opportunity to ask question about workshops because we have a very distinct class of artifacts that were all made at the same time in the same region, and maybe we can identify actual workshops that were relevant to this time. We tried to look at style of the coffins to see the various scenes. For example, this is a worshiping scene where we see a deity sitting in front of various amulets and symbols of worship. But the fact is that there's a great variety of these scenes, and it's very hard to identify the workshops according to that. However, in a MA work by Chen Zhao at Tel Aviv University, he identified that on stylistic grounds, we see a difference between the upper and lower sections of the coffin, and as if they have been planned and executed separately. And this will become important as we go along and check the materials and the preparation layers of the two sections of the coffin. The first thing we wanted to see was how the coffin was constructed. What is the number and the arrangement of the wood planks used and the distribution of this. And we could have some idea about how it was constructed, but we quickly realized that a two-dimensional top view of the wooden coffin was not enough. So we decided to take her to the hospital, and Shalei Tzedek in Jerusalem accepted our JEDMUT for a CT scan, which is still being analyzed, but I can show you just from one of the sections that you can actually see the various pieces of wood, how they were put together, the kind of fillings that they had. And this reveals really a larger picture about the kind of jigsaw work that had to be done for the construction of this wooden coffin. As we moved on to identify the actual material, thanks to Dr. Daphne Langut from Tel Aviv University, who identified that the coffin was made of sycamore wood, but several parts of it were also made of different kinds of wood, like tamarisk at the bottom of the coffin. Again, not surprising that now that we saw the CT and we know that there's a large variety of wood pieces inside this coffin. We proceeded to ask what happens after the wood, what kind of layers were placed on the wood before it could be decorated. And we did a cross-section analysis. We sent it to Dr. Tracy Chaplin in the UK, and we did it from two different parts of the coffin, remembering that we probably saw some differences in the hand that was doing the decoration work. So we wondered maybe there are other differences. Her analysis gave us a layered picture, starting from a brown-gray ground layer on the wood, and then a white calcium layer above it, and then the application of blue paint with Egyptian blue and some other finishing application above it. From the upper part of the coffin, we could see again the lower coarse brown-gray ground that was placed on the wood and the white layer, but this time there was red paint underneath the Egyptian blue surface paint. So there was a variation in the pigments. This coarse brown-gray level here was very interesting to us. And we gave it to Dr. Daphne Langut to see if she could get any pollen from it. And indeed, she identified mostly barley from the pollen analysis, very few beets. And it was surprising, or maybe telling, that there was no water vegetation markers in this kind of muddy ground layer, but only the barley pollen. And the fact that we have such high ratios of barley pollen without anything else indicated that the layer contained some livestock dung. Separately, we submitted part of this layer to a petrographical examination by Professor Yuval Goen. And indeed, he identified in this first layer an artificial mixture of marl with densely packed uncharred grassy material from herbivore dung, most likely sheep or goat. This is evident by the chewed state of the vegetal matter, but most of all by the abundance of spherulites in the matter. Moving on top of this ground layer, preliminary XRF results identified pigments of a kind of usual known pigments in the Egyptian repertoire. And at the moment, we are looking for some further investigations in doing the CT analysis FTIR analysis to identify binders of the pigments, and RTI and multispectral imaging to identify artist strokes and more. We do have some preliminary conclusions. First, as we could see, the coffin was assembled from various pieces of timber. A layer of mud containing animal dung covered the timber. The high ratios of barley pollen most probably indicate that the livestock were fed with hay rather than straw. The former is considered a superior animal food since it involves most of the cereal organs, and therefore we have the pollen. The mud was therefore taken from an area designated for well-fed livestock. If the workshop was near the mud, and we don't have any records of things that are being brought to a workshop that are anything close to mud, then its location was not on the Nile banks, nor was it in a temple precinct, as some would consider workshops. This is the first time we have some indication on the physical environment of a workshop. The pigments were not unusual in their contents, perhaps barring the red, and therefore are not particularly good for workshop identifiers. However, parts of the coffin were treated differently, and this was compatible with what we saw in the decoration. So it might indicate that all stages of the work in the upper and lower sections were planned and executed separately. So there was a team working on the bottom part, a team working on the upper part. What we can say at this point is that workshop markers are likely to be identified in the layered materials, in the mud, in the gypsum, than they are in the pigments. And perhaps also in the assemblage technique of the wooden planks and pieces, which the CT has shown are far more complex than initially envisioned. Our goal now is to create an easy protocol for analysis of the layers in other coffins around the world and group them according to whatever we see there in terms of the pollen and the petrography. And maybe that would give us for the first time the ability to see a group of coffins from one single workshop in ancient Egypt. I'd like to finish with thanking a huge research group that is working on this project, and some of their results I showed here. From the Israel Museum, Chaim Hitler, Miro Lev, Jessica Lewinsky, Michal Blanket-Ganor, and Ronen Dor. And from other places, Yotam Asher, Yuval Goren, Deborah Sweeney, Daphne Langut, Daniela Galazzo, Tracy Chaplin, Chen Zhao, and Eshchar Gichon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shirley. And we'll now depart for a short break, and we will resume our conference in 15 minutes at 6:45. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Eran, you're muted.
Thank you, Meir. So hello, everyone, again, and thank you for joining us back in this annual meeting. And I would like to present Dr. Meir Edrei, the professional director of the Recanati Institute for Maritime Studies, will be the chairperson of the second session. Mayor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eran. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'd like to welcome you to the second and final session of the first annual RIMS meeting. Again, since we're on a tight schedule, we won't have time for questions. If you have any burning question or a comment, you can find the contact information of the various speakers on the Recanati Institute website at maritime.haifa.ac.il. And now, without further ado, I'd like to invite our first speaker, Professor Asaf Yasur Landau, who, as you probably know, is the head of the Institute. He's also an archaeologist working both on land and sea. And the floor is yours, Asaf.
Many thanks, Mayor. This is a joint lecture together with my dear colleague, Professor Thomas E. Levy. Let me share the presentation. So in the next 20 minutes or so, I would speak, or we would speak, about the history of ports and anchorages in the Carmel Coast, a view from Tel Dor. Both me and Tom Levy are very grateful for the opportunity to be here together. The climate, as well as other changes in sea levels, changes in the geometry of the coast, are causing changes to coastal infrastructure, causing its degradation, causing the need to modify it. Also, technological needs and abilities cause the need to change the harbor or coastal infrastructure, creating a feedback mechanism between humans and nature. In recent work by our team, we have shown that there is a significant sea level change between the Hellenistic period and between the early Roman period, something of almost 2-meter rise in rather short period. The same mechanism have also ended in a loss of Hellenistic maritime infrastructure at Dor, Akko, and the Hellenistic harbor of Caesarea, Straton's Tower. The work that Tom Levy and I have conducted, and this is summarizing it, during the years of 2018 to 2022, we have conducted together underwater excavations supported by the Murray-Gallison Foundation in 2018, and then the Koret Foundation UCSD Haifa partnership from 2019 and on. These also included study excavations of the Department of Maritime Civilizations at the University of Haifa. Let us look now at Tel Dor, this magnificent site beginning at something like 2000 BC and ending at, or the top habitation ending at the late Roman period, with numerous bays that we'll deal with only 3 here, the North Bay to the north, with 2 areas of excavation areas Z, X, and W, the Love Bay with underwater excavation at the middle of it, and the South Bay with 2 excavation areas in south of the Tel, immediately south of it, and also at the south part of the bay. At the same time, we have conducted, led by Dr. Gilad Steinberg, a massive geoarchaeological effort that was published in numerous publications showing the stratigraphy and the environmental change from Neolithic period to the present. We should not speak about it, but certainly you could contact me or Professor Levy to see the results of it. Let us begin this quick survey by previous work conducted and led by Udi Arkin-Shalev that presented before as part of his dissertation. And together we have excavated underwater a line of fortification from the Iron Age 1, a mole of the Iron Age 1, later part of the Iron Age 1, of course, buried underwater and encrusted with a thick crust, biogenic crust caused after sea level change. This is the early Iron Age harbor of Dor, as well as, and you can see it here, Iron Age 1B seawall. Before that, there was Iron 1A bastion, and then you have modifications to it. First, an Iron 2 paving going between the seawall and the wall, and finally Iron 3 Assyrian period gateway. All of this showing a lot of energy that went into the Iron Age construction of the harbor in the South Bay. We also encountered the question of where was the Hellenistic harbor buried at Dor, because we have seen a square anomaly in a study, a geophysical study conducted by our friends Lazar and Basson, and published a few years ago, or several articles published a few years ago. And here you can see an anomaly, perhaps a square anomaly, perhaps a tower, which is buried under the sand at the south part of the bay, as well as something that we thought it may be a second tower that we can see underwater with a thick crust. So in 2019, we have excavated there for a short season. This is a very difficult place to excavate because in the winter it's too wavy, and in the summer people are bathing there. So it's rather hard to excavate. But what we have found is a built or massive feature built of large and small ashlar blocks underneath the sand in a rather shallow water, something like 1.5 meter. And what we think is that we have parts of fortifications, and it continues all the way under the sand, and there's also crust, biogenic crust on top of it, and you can see the ashlar here. What we think is that we have terrestrial fortification dating to the Hellenistic period that blocked the South Bay from the south. The composition of large and small blocks is also seen in the eastern fortification, the Eastern Hellenistic fortification of Dor, published by the late Professor Ilan Sharon. There's also a bit of pottery dating to the Hellenistic period or a bit earlier. So what we have is a possible Hellenistic harbor, but for sure we have a massive Hellenistic building just below the surface of the water and submerged during the early Roman period. Going to the north, we look at the so-called Love Bay, which has by it, to the south of it, these enigmatic structures called the ship sheds. And these were thought to represent places in which boats were stored and then launched into the sea during Persian or Roman or Hellenistic period. And of course, the question is, do we have any evidence for maritime activity in this bay? Please notice to the north, this will be a topic of another lecture also by Professor Levy and myself about the fish processing plant, which is the new name for the purple dye factory. Actually, it's a fish processing plant of the Roman period. So underwater, we have carried during the winter of 2022, last winter, Professor Ruti Shachar-Gross was conducting land excavations by us. We will not relate to the results right now, but what we shall relate are the results that are connected with the Roman period. And indeed, what we have found is that the base of the bay is very, very shallow. The rock bottom is something like 2.2 to 2.4 meters only, meaning that this place was dry land during the Hellenistic and pre-Hellenistic period, and indeed was a part of the real estate of the city during the Iron Age and during the Hellenistic period. We see this map prepared by Marko Runjajic, which shows the sea level at 2 meters in the Hellenistic period, and then in 2.5 or 3 meters during the Iron Age, showing different geometry for the coast. And here you see part of a model of the excavation showing a large mooring stone, heap of ballast, as well as few finds, including a lead sail brail ring, as well as a nail connected with maritime activity of the Roman period. There is no pottery predating the Roman period there. So what we think is that the ship sheds here are not connected with Phoenician or Hellenistic activity, but rather they are connected with Roman activity. And indeed, they may be called slipways, bringing stones into the great temples that are just to the south of them. Before that, it was all dry during the Hellenistic period. Going to the North Bay, we must begin by saying that there are two parts of the North Bay. There's the northern part of the North Bay, which is almost 4 meters deep. And there's the southern part of the North Bay, which is up to 2 meters deep. So we sample both of these areas in November 2021 in two areas, Area W and Area X, in order to understand stratification, in order to understand the use of them for mooring before and after the sea level rise. And indeed, in Area W, as shown by previous survey by Udi Arkin-Shalev, is that activity begins in the Bronze Age, actually in the Middle Bronze Age, and going all the way to Byzantine period. What we have found there is this anchor, and below it there's a level with also Roman and Hellenistic pottery. And as you can see, I think this is for the first time shown here, there's a lovely gold ring shown with some kind of a bird, perhaps a parrot, belonging to a Roman deposit, which had also bones with cut marks, analyzed by Sierra Harding, and we will publish all these results. There's also cooking pots that have burn marks. So we think that somebody was washing some dishes there or something of the sort and throwing some junk. And during that time, they lost their ring, or some other compelling story. But this ring is Roman and it is very, very lost. Underneath it all, there were Neolithic remains, but we shall deal with it in another lecture. So this is Area W. On the southern part, there is Area X. And here we had some form of a surprise, because there was a year before a lot of sand moved, and we could see some structures. And then you can see two lines of very large structures that are perpendicular to the wall, as well as ashlar lines that are parallel to the wall. We have, together with both Haifa and San Diego team, have excavated this feature, which is rather long. This feature alone is 40 meters long. Look at the human scales here, snorkeling and diving around this. It is 40 meters long and circa 10 minutes wide. The same type of stones are there, excavated underwater, as those that were found in the Roman temple, the huge Roman temples that are by the Love Bay, or between the South Bay and the Love Bay. So what we think is that this feature was a feature that was formed during Roman period, a key that was used for moving stones, basically large stones, from the quarries to the north to the large construction projects at the northern part of the city. It's also possible because it was, by that time, by the Roman period, it was something like 2 meters, that shallower boats or smaller boats, small boats with smaller draft, could have also anchored by it, using it, making it a form of the anchorage, or rather the harbor of Dor that we are still looking for it, because up to now, as you know, there's no built harbor for Dor. So this may be now side by side with the southern lagoon, the Tantura Lagoon, south of the South Bay, maybe the second contender to a harbor of the Roman period at Dor. To sum up, the changing geometry of the Dor bays required the inhabitants of Dor to arrange maritime activity and to arrange even city plan, turning lemons into lemonade. That is, you can see, again in a reconstruction made by Marko Runjajic, you can see the northern part of the Dor Lagoon, in which, of course, there's no boats found, absolutely dry during Hellenistic period. Then you can see the South Bay with the water line of -2 meters. Most of it is dry. This is the area of the Hellenistic fortification. And indeed, the line goes more or less where the line of the coastal structures are, that is not the walls that are on dry land, but where the mall is and where boat could moor in the middle of this bay in the Bronze Age and also in the Iron Age, where the interface structures were built. Going to the Love Bay, it is possible that this island may have been a part of the fortification of Dor already in the Hellenistic period. It is carved in something that resembles fortification, but it was not used as a harbor or as anchorage in any period predating the Roman period. It is now supported also by excavation underwater, and only in the Roman period it had water to merit the construction of the ship sheds that indeed should be looked as slipways, bringing stones from the quarry through barges all the way to the massive Roman structures and temples here to the north. Finally, you can see in the North Bay that the northern anchorage was used in all periods, but only in the Roman period there was enough water in the North Bay to merit to become an anchorage and to allow it to be used as for maritime activity. I thank you very much. I thank the maritime workshops and all the field directors and all the specialists from both University of Haifa and UCSD.
Thank you, Asaf. That was very interesting. And our next lecturer is Dr. David Friesen. David is an environmental archaeologist. His main research interests relate to microarchaeology and history. He is currently leading an ERC-funded project that examines human-environment interactions during the Paleolithic period. David?
Yes, so let me share my screen. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. So thank you very much. So as Mary said, my name is David Friesen. I'm the head of the Environmental Microhistory Lab as part of the Recanati Institute and a senior lecturer at the Department of Maritime Civilizations. And today I want to present to you our flagship project at the lab, funded by the European Research Council. And together on our project, which is called Before the Flood, our team, which is composed of Ehud Galili as a senior researcher, two postdoc, Dr. Isaac Ogloblin Ramirez and Dr. Eli Gruno, Ronnie Zuckerman, the lab manager, and our partner, Daphne Langut from Tel Aviv University, and Nicholas Waldman from the Department of Marine Geoscience at Haifa, and PhD candidate Vishal Katuria, who's working with Nicholas Waldman. So the goal of our project is to understand the development of complex societies in relation to coastal environment. So about 10,000 years ago, we're talking about one of the most major transition in human history, the transition from Paleolithic hunter-gatherers to Neolithic farmers, alongside the beginning of sedentism, of new ways of economy, such as agriculture, animal management, new social organizations, and also new rituals and new symbolic world that emerges. So basically, you could say that what we're looking at is this period which is before the flood. And specifically what we want to look at is to look on how the relations and the influence, the feedback between environmental changes or dynamics and cultural changes, and focusing on coastal and wetlands ecosystem, which we think had a vital role in the development of more complex forms of society. So the thing is that we know that the Neolithic period starts around the Eastern Mediterranean in the Near East, and then spread into Europe across the Mediterranean. And therefore, we can assume quite certainly that coastal societies had a vital role in this spread of the Neolithic. So while we know we have coastal societies, we know they played an important role, but who were those people? Who were those actual societies? We actually know very little about them. Now, the reason that is we don't have much of their sites and not much of their archaeological record, because since the last ice age, we have global warming, we have ice sheet melting, and we have rising of the sea level. Sounds familiar, of course. But since the peak of the last ice age, we are talking about a rise of about 120 meters. So that's quite a lot. And in the early Holocene, which is the period that we're looking at the beginning of the Neolithic, you could see a very sharp rise in sea level, almost 8 millimeters per year if you try to do some average. Just so you know, today the most horrifying scenario are talking about 4 millimeters per year. So we're talking about almost 2 times double the pace of sea level rise. Now, it's very interesting because we're looking at those sites on the coast, and we see that not only the environment change, but also, as I said, it is exactly the same time that we have a lot of changes in the culture, a lot of cultural innovation. So what we want to look at is those relations between the two. And the earliest permanent coastal sites dating to the Neolithic period are actually found here at the Carmel coast, which has been excavated and studied by Ehud Galili for almost over 40 years. And the oldest of all of them is Atlit Yam, which you can see here on the map being marked. And really thanks to Ehud Galili work in Atlit Yam specifically, but in also the other ones, we have a remarkable archaeological record coming from the site with preservation that we could only dream on to have on land, such as baskets and remains of flax, ancient DNA that was found in the burials, a water well, and so on. And as you can see here on the bottom left, there is a picture of Isaac and myself above one of the structure, one of the houses in Atlit Yam. And you can see that it's partly covered by sand, partly exposed. And most of the site, which is now between 10 to 12 meters below current sea level, is covered with sand. And from time to time, after some storms, some part of the site is being exposed. And as I said, Ehud Galili for 40 years have been mapping the site and resulting with this detailed map that you can see on the right. So when we talk about the environment in the Carmel Coast, specifically during the early Holocene, we are actually talking about an extremely dynamic environment. Some reconstructions that have been made about the environment talk about the formation of short-lived marshes, of wetlands. And together with other coastal changes that happen in this area, such as the rise of sea levels and having storms and perhaps even tsunamis from time to time, we are talking about different risks, such as we have rise in soil salinity, floodings. All of them possess a risk to the Neolithic lifeways. And in fact, it has been suggested that wetlands in general are a barrier for early agricultural societies. But if you look on other examples, such as in southern Mesopotamia, what is today southern Iraq, you see that actually agricultural and agrarian life can be managed in wetlands, as you can see in the pictures from the 60s in southern Iraq. And also, if you look at the Ubaid culture, which predates the development of the earliest city in Uruk in southern Mesopotamia. So our hypothesis is that not only those environments were not a barrier for Neolithic lifeways, but actually being in such an environment that is constantly changing, that is very dynamic, and this is something that also Asaf just showed in one of his first slides, it necessitates immediate response, constant adaptive solutions from the society that lives there. And in fact, what we think is that it is an engine for cultural innovation. And therefore, coastal societies might have played a much more vital role in cultural innovation of the Neolithic than we actually know. But how can we know it when they are all so buried underwater? So our method is basically to do sediment cores because it's so difficult to excavate large sections. And by doing sediment, by coring the sediments, we can core from the site itself to look on the deep stratigraphy of the archaeology, to look on changes through time, and also to core just near the site in order to gain understanding of the immediate environment. Most of the reconstructions of the Carmel Coast has been so far made by several cores extrapolating on vast environment. What here we want to do is to have very high resolution on the site itself and its very surrounding area, where there's swamps here or not there, what happened 50 meters from one swamp to the other, and so on. And in order to correlate between the layers of the environmental record and the layers of the archaeological record, we are applying all sets of different analysis. So here is a short glimpse of some of our preliminary results as we started this project only in October, and some of it is being presented here for the first time. So what we do is that we have cored already 25 cores from Atlantium. You can see here the map showing 23 cores. 2 cores were a part of an earlier pilot study in September 22. And you see that we have a very detailed coring every 50 meters from the site itself, but also from its immediate surrounding. We've been diving before, marking the exact location we want in relation to houses, to other archaeological finds. You can see Ehud Galili on the left, and in the middle Isaac and myself. And on the right, you see a helmet diver hammering down the pipe with a stand that we built specifically for this. Then after it is being hammered down, the pipes are being lifted by a crane mounted on a boat, and then each core is marked and taped. You can see here Ronnie marking and taping the cores. In general, we have, usually our cores are between 1 to 3 meter long in terms of sediments inside, and then they are being transported to the lab. Then in the lab, we split them into half, we photograph them, and then carefully sample them for further analysis. You can see here on the left, Vishal and Isaac and Eli, looking at the core, marking the layers, and then sampling it for further analysis. And this is some of the results from our pilot studies. So you can see here the location of the 2 cores on the map on the left. So one of the core was taken exactly from structure number 9. Okay, so really from the center of the structure, from the inner part of it. And we could identify in this core 3 different layers. And in the second layer, measuring between 60 to 95 centimeters below the surface, we have found several evidence for human activity, such as fire residues and high concentration of botanical remains in form of phytoliths. So we could already see that we actually have here an evidence for deep stratigraphy, but also that we have an evidence for human occupation of the site, which might be a bit earlier than the phase that we see and exposed once the sand is being removed. So dating of materials from the core indicate that indeed we are in the pre-pottery Neolithic sea, so the PPNC around 9,000 years ago, which has been also suggested by Ehud Galili and the previous studies. But also at the deeper part of the core, we have several charcoal dating to the late PPNB, maybe even the middle PPNB, almost 1,000 earlier than what was known so far. But just a side note, there is our charcoal, and we might be dealing here with some old wood effect. So we are now looking to date more short-lived material and having much more coarse dating to really establish the timing of human occupation and changes in the environment. Very interestingly here, you can see that when we looked on the micromorphology, so we really examined the sediments under the microscope, we could see that we have a change in the environment from an environment that is more wet to a drier environment, with the top part showing already erosion made by the sea as sea level rises, but below the top, let's say from 10 centimeters below the top of the core, the sediments seem intact and undisturbed by the rise of sea level. And very interestingly, we can see that the deepest indications of human activity at the site kind of rest at the same layer where we have also evidence of wetlands. So for now, again, it's very initial and we need to have more data for that, but it seems that humans either arrived when the environment was still wet, or at least within this transition. And again, if this is correct, then we are talking here about the possibility that the wetlands were not a barrier at all to human occupation at the site, but it already shows from this pilot study, and just one core I'm showing you here, the potential to correlate between human activity and environmental change at the site. Further analysis showed that we have very good preservation of microremains, microbotanical remains such as phytoliths, and what you see here are mostly phytoliths that can be related to cereals, agriculture, and grasses. So again, evidence for agricultural activity. Pollen remains were not a lot, but from the few that we did found, it seems that we have indications for different types of environment, really indicating the diversity and the dynamic of this specific ecological niche. And also interestingly, from the non-pollen polymorph, we have at the top layer an nilotic spore, really indicating that the sand that is coming and covering the site is from the Nile, which is usually the suggestion. And even though we only found one, so it's really hard to base a lot of interpretation of that, Ellie did identified a human whipworm, a parasite, that you can see here down on the middle. This is a parasite that is the human whipworm that is transmitted through a fecal oral transmission. Which might indicate on the conditions of living in those early coastal communities, because usually when I don't think it was ever found in Israel in such an early site. Usually it's found in later sites, and that usually is used as an indication for poor sanitary and hygiene conditions that could have contaminated food or water supplies with some fecal waste. So again, you can see the potential, even though it's at the moment very preliminary, and we have only few of each of those proxies, but it shows the preservation and the potential. And if that's from one core, what will happen when we'll finish with the other 24 cores? And really fresh from the oven, just from last week, this is a sickle blade that was found only 10 centimeters below the top part of core number 7, near structure number 13, you can see with the arrow. And this sickle blade is very indicative for the PPNC, which again makes sense because it's in the top part. Analysis of useware was done by Iris Groman-Yaroslavsky from the Department of Archaeology at Haifa, who said that the tool looks like it has been untouched since it was last used in the Neolithic. So very good preservation, only 10 centimeters below the surface. Again, an indication that the rise of sea level did not disturb the site so much. And the useware analysis is indicative to harvesting of cereals in ripe conditions. So again, more evidence for agriculture. So I will finish not with conclusion, but with some preliminary thoughts so far. So first of all, we see that human occupation at the Titian consists at least several episodes, at least over the PPNC. We see some sometimes with reduced activity. So we might have several episodes within the PPNC, or we even have episodes starting much earlier in the PPNB, which will predate the already earliest coastal sites during the Neolithic. And from what we have so far, we see that human activity in the site is still characterized to its very end by very intensive agricultural activity. From previous studies, we know that also fishing was a major part, and this integrated economy between farming, management of animal agriculture, and fishing. And we see that the surrounding environment is indeed very diverse. And in that sense, I think it was also very attractive because you could have very different resources very nearby to each other, but you also see that the environment is dynamic and rapidly changing. And very interestingly, it seems that the first occupation of the site might predate the drying of surrounding wetlands. And again, that tells us something about the role of this wetland environment in a cultural innovation. So this is up to here, and I need to thank all the people that so far helped us in this project. You can see below the link to our project website, which has also regular updates for you to see. So thank you very much, and back to you.
Thank you, David, for that really interesting presentation. Our next speaker is Professor Emmanuel Nantes. Emmanuel is an underwater archaeologist interested in nautical archaeology and history, and he's also currently leading an ERC-funded project that aims to map ancient harbor systems. He is also the director of the South Tiberias Excavation Project. So, Emmanuel, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much, Meir, for those words. Let me now show you the results of a small project with a very small budget dedicated to the research that we have conducted in Lake Nemi. So for this, we need to leave our remote province of Judea and to sail to the center of the Mediterranean, and more precisely to the center of the Roman Empire, because our lake is located very close to Rome. You see where we are, it's very close to Rome, in the outskirts today of the modern city of Rome today. In these outskirts, you have in fact two lakes, Lake Albano, which is bigger, and you have the other lake, which is smaller, Lake Nemi. And you see we are not that far from the sea, which is quite important. This lake is, as you can see it here, is a volcanic lake, which is not, of course, this volcano is not in activity anymore. You see here the view of the lake from the modern town of Nemi that was built in the medieval and early modern period. You can see to the right a terrace that correspond to the field house where we used to work for our research. And you can see the rest of the lake because the town is located very high above the lake. The most important today for the tourists who are visiting this place is, of course, the view, the strawberries, and the village too. But they completely, for many of them, ignore the past, even though you will see it's quite important. This lake is indeed full of archaeological remains. The two most famous remains are the two boats that are located to the northwestern shore of the lake. And those two boats, huge boats, were found in the late 20s when the lake was dried up with the support of the fascist regime. And the archaeologists could, led by Guido Uccelli, could uncover those huge boats that are 70 meters long, which is quite unusual. And for this reason, they, because of the extraordinary discovery, they decided to, the regime decided to build a museum designed by the architect Morpurgo, and that was inaugurated by the Duce, by Mussolini, in 1938. During that excavation, many finds were discovered, like, for example, two huge anchors of two different models, one in iron and another one which is mixed with lead stock and wooden shaft. Also many sculptured bronze fittings you see that are animal-shaped, lion-shaped or wolf-shaped that were fixed to the boats. Many sculptures that were found in those boats that were like casino or yachts that belonged to probably to the emperor because they are very very rich. On those boats were found also some lead pipes here that you can see that were used to evacuate to remove the water from the hold. And they on one of those pipes there is an inscription, Caesaris Augustus Germanis, which means which is of course the title of Caligula, who ruled from 37 to 41 CE. So for this reason, archaeologists consider that those boats, those huge boats, belonged to Caligula. In that lake, in Nemi, you have other archaeological remains that have been excavated later, I would say over the past few decades, especially the sanctuary of Diana that is located to the north of the lake, that is marked with the number 2. And several important structures have been found there, especially a nymphaeum dated to the Julio-Claudian period. And you see that is located, that is marked with a V on the plan. You have many other structures, porticos, etc. And you have, especially in K, you have a temple dedicated to Diana that was more recently excavated by Francesca Diozono and her team. Another important remain, a villa that is located to the west, to the western shore of the lake. You see, that's what you have. It's marked with the number 1 in yellow, and it's extending south north. Here you can see more details, This villa was built on the shore of the lake and was particularly luxurious. It was a very wealthy villa where some capitals had been found, and that villa was dated to the late Republican period. And this villa maybe could have belonged to someone very important, probably Caius Julius Caesar himself. That's probably where he was spending his vacation, because Nemi is very well located. It's close to Rome, as I said, but it's very high. It's in a mountain. So during the summer, you have fresh air, and that's where many Roman elites were going during the summer. You don't have only that villa, you have many other villas in the area, which is quite important. So that in that lake you have several important remains, as I mentioned, archaeological remains. They are famous for archaeologists, like, for example, the boats. They are also well known in the popular culture, because some people think that there would have been maybe a third ship. So for the past 100 years, some people are looking for a third boat that has never been found. Even some geophysical surveys have been conducted there recently, and no boat has been found. Oh, sorry, there is one boat that was found, but it was a very modern boat, and very small one, of course. And at the same time, because of the sanctuary of Diana, you have some beliefs, recent beliefs, that this area is particularly protected nowadays, and you still have people performing rituals for Diana today. So I would say that even if the tourists that are visiting Nemi don't visit the museum anymore, because the boats that I showed you have burnt at the end of World War II, but you still have some important remains that are displayed, and tourists don't go there. However, you have another category of people who are quite interested in the lake for other reasons, as I said. So you have to consider this context in which we have conducted our research, our underwater investigation. Of course, everyone thought that we were looking for the third boat at first. You have another important remain, that is the emissary. Indeed, to the western shore of the lake, here just below, just to the south of the villa, you have an emissary with a tunnel that was carved through the rock of the mountain, and that reaches the external side of the mountain. And indeed, you have a stream that was connecting Lake Nemi to the sea, and that stream was irrigating the entire area between Lake Nemi and the sea. That, of course, that stream that provides fresh water contributes to explaining the prosperity of Roman agriculture. This emissary was closed by a gate that could be reconstructed. You see, like a double sluice gate here. This emissary, this tunnel in any case, would have been built during the late Republican period, probably with many phases, many changes, several periods that are evidence for this tunnel. Now let's talk about the core of our investigation, the embankments. The embankments, indeed, during when the lake was dried up in the 20s, in the late 20s, they found not only the ships, they found not only the boats, they found also some embankments. Of course, at this moment, the boats were so astonishing that everyone looked at the boats and forgot to focus also on the embankments. However, the embankments are there, and there are quite a few embankments all around the lake. You have some of them that are located to the south, others that have been spotted to the east, others to the north, and even to the west. So you have on all the shores of the lake, some parts have been reinforced, probably with those embankments. You have several kinds of embankments that have been documented when the lake was dried up. You can see here the embankments located in Licino. It's one part of the lake to the eastern part of the lake, and they just do. It's the only part that was documented. We only have those few documents, those few drawings that were made by Giammitti, and you can see that indeed the two embankments in Licino and Grenzano are completely different. The structure is completely different. Here you see the architecture is very different, and if you see more closely the formwork, these embankments that were made and documented by Uccelli's team, you can see more closely, and you see a rectangular structure with a double line of piles to the side, and close to the lake. You have also another double line, and those double lines are filled with clay. That's what Guido Uccelli's team documented more precisely. So what are those embankments exactly? The team that studied the caissons in Caesarea identified those embankments with caissons. I remind you that in Caesarea, some caissons have been evidenced, wooden caissons have been evidenced and studied by the group called Romacons, Roman Maritime Concrete Study, and they extended their investigation from Caesarea to many other imperial harbors in the Mediterranean. You know this technique, some variants are evidenced. The idea consists in building a wooden formwork that you fill with cement. You have several typologies of those frameworks that are evidence. But the investigation conducted by Romacon's group focused mostly on imperial harbors and on maritime harbors. They did not focus on later constructions of this kind, like, for example, the formwork that I excavated in Tiberias, which is dated to the very late Byzantine period, and they did not focus on lake structures. They focused rather on maritime structures. So that was a good opportunity here in Nemi to offer a comparison with Tiberias. Nemi is probably the only lake comparison, almost the only lake comparison that can be helpful to better understand the structures that have been erected in Tiberias. In the late 90s, one C14 sample was collected on one of those spies in Lake Nemi. We don't know which one exactly. The exact location of the sampling was not recorded, and it seems that the dating of the C14 indicates a date between, let's say the second and the first century BCE, which is very old for this technology. It would mean in that case that it would be maybe the first evidence of that caisson technology. In that case, the fact that it appears in a lake where you have the villa maybe of that was erected that belonged to Caesar, maybe that could be an interesting fact to better understand the birth of this technology. So that precisely this dating that we wanted to investigate further in order to offer a comparison with Tiberius. When you see here the map, the location of our investigation took place to the very south, here, where you have the red cross, the red star. This is a picture of the investigation. You see, it took place, I wouldn't say by shallow water, but by extremely shallow water, where I have 20, 30, 40 centimeters. In some places, maybe we could reach 60 centimeters or 1 meter, but don't believe that it was easy. Don't believe that it was easy, because when you excavate in extremely shallow water, you cannot excavate like if you're excavating on land, but you don't have the advantage to be underwater. It means that for the pictures, for everything, this is extremely complicated. So we documented the area where those piles have been found. You have some examples of the few pictures that we could take underwater despite the very shallow depths. Here you see an example of those piles. You see that they are not well preserved. We cannot see the traces of the tools. And if you see here, you see that we could reconstruct a double line, probably corresponding to the caisson, to the formwork that I showed you before. We don't know if it's exactly the same, but in any case, it shows the same double line of piles that was filled indeed with clay between the piles. We sampled many piles for 3 species identification, and also for dendrochronology, we took bigger samples. You see that we could precisely detailed and drew. Many of them had many numerous rings that allowed the study of their section. So we conducted a regal matching analysis that combined C14 dating and dendrochronology. You see here that we have pile 42 and pile 151, where we took 3 samples, for example, on the Nemi 42, that was made of oak. And you see that this one was dated between 27 and BCE and 13 CE. Another example, Nemi 151, that corresponded to a fir tree. And with 3 samples, we could determine that it was cut between 29 BCE and 25 CE. Another one, which is Nemi 23, that counted 250 rings, and that could be dated between 50 BCE and 7 CE. As you can see now, most of those trees, of those samples that have been dated with wiggle matching analysis have been cut, I would say, probably during the Augustan period. I remind you that the boats that we mentioned were built during the rule of Caligula, probably at latest, I would say. And the emissary and the sanctuary of Diana are dated to the Republican period. So these embankments show that shows a process of controlling the lake together with the emissary that I showed you. So this is still a research in progress. There are still there's still much work to do, but in any case, you can see, however, that with a very small project, we could, however, get interesting results. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And now we come to our last speaker of the day and one of the Institute's latest acquisitions, Dr. Shlomit Bechal. Shlomit is an archaeologist focusing on ceramic analysis, interconnections between different cultures, trade relations, and the impact of environmental change in antiquity. She's also the director of the lower city of Tel Chatzor and co-director of an excavation at Atlit. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, Meir. And thank you everybody for staying until this very last talk of the day. So like Meir said, my name is Shlomit Bechar, and today I will be presenting to you together with Omri Lernau, the assemblages of fish bones from Tel Chatzor of the Late Bronze Age and the Iron Age. So the nature of assemblages of fish bones that are found at sites can tell us many different things about the consumers of the fish. The fish bones are first analyzed and we retrieve different kinds of data, and this can later answer our research questions. So the different data that we retrieve from the fish bones are, first of all, identification of the kinds of fish that we have. Do we have mainly local fish or non-local fish? And in this sense, local fish are freshwater fish that come from near water water bodies, such as the Chula Lake, the Jordan River, and the Sea of Galilee. And the non-local fish, when we're talking about Chatzor, come from the Mediterranean Sea and the Nile River. The second piece of data is the amount of fish bones that we have at the site. Do we have a small amount, indicating that fish didn't comprise a major part of the diet of the inhabitants? Or do we have a large amount of fish, indicating that people did rely on fish? And the other possibility is that we have a huge amount of fish bone, indicating that this abundance of fish did show some kind of wealth and conspicuous consumption. We also look at the size of the fish that were brought to the site. Do we have mainly large fish, which also reflect some kinds of fishing techniques and the abilities of the inhabitants of the site? Or do we have many small fish, which reflect a completely different fishing technique? We also look at the body parts that were brought to the site. Do we have the heads of the fish at the site, or were these left at the fishing site? And lastly, we look at the cooking methods. What kind of cooking habits did the inhabitants or the consumers of the fish have? And can we identify changes in these cooking habits between the different periods, which can also reflect changes in the social metrics of the site? So this data was the focus of our project at Tel Chatzor, which we named Fish and Chips. We collected samples from different contexts from the site to examine the fish and rodent bones, the botanic remains, and the flint chips. And Tel Chatzor is located in the Upper Galilee. I'm sorry, 1 second. I see that it's very, very dark here. Excuse me, I was in the conference and all of a sudden it became night. We examined the fish and rodent bones, the botanic remains, and the flint chips. I was saying that Tel Chatzor is located on the Upper Galilee, at the Upper Galilee, about 15 kilometers north of the Sea of Galilee, on the southwestern shores of the Chula Lake, and not far from the Jordan River. In the second millennium BCE, in the Bronze Age, it was the largest and most important Canaanite center in the southern Levant. It encompassed an area of about 80 hectares, including an upper city and a lower city. And this city was destroyed in a large conflagration sometime in the middle of the 13th century BCE, and was rebuilt as an urban center in the 10th century BCE, but only on the upper city. And this city continued to thrive until it was finally destroyed in 732 during the military campaign of Tiglath-Pileser III against the northern kingdom of Israel. So the samples for our fish and chips project were collected from Area M. Area M is located on the northern slopes of the Tel of the upper city the connection between the upper city and the lower city. And we collected these samples from different contexts. First, from the administrative palace, which is dated to the late Bronze Age, which is located at the entrance to the upper city. And here you can see this is a typical Syrian palace with a courtyard, which is surrounded by different rooms. And in this palace, we found several royal Egyptian statues indicating that there was a close relationship between the king of Chatzor and the Egyptian rulers. We also collected samples from Iron II context. Here you can see a public context. These are two tripartite storage houses, which are dated to the 9th century. This is one storage house with the 3 halls, and this is the other storage house. And we also collected samples from this residential and industrial quarter, which is dated to the 8th century BCE. And the samples from all these different contexts were collected from floors, from pits, installations, and of course, destruction layers. So in our talk today, from these different kinds of data that we can discuss, our talk today is going to focus only on the identification of the different types of fish that we found in these various contexts at Chatzor. And we're going to focus on the question if these are local fish or non-local fish. So after we examined all the fish bones, we saw that almost all of them, so 93% of the fish, were local fish from the Hula Lake, the Sea of Galilee, or the Jordan River, and only 7% of the fish were non-local. And like I said before, these fish originated in the Mediterranean Sea or the Nile River. And when we take a closer look, we see that although we have all the types of the local fish in this assemblage, most of the fish, which is this light green right here, it's over 60% of the fish are actually catfish. When we look at, yes?
Your presentation appears a bit wonky. There's images on top of images. Can you also see that, or maybe you should restart it?
Okay. Is it better now?
Yes, now it looks okay.
Okay. Okay. So when we look at the fish bones by their numbers, it's clear to see how rare these non-local fish, so from the yellow here, the porgies, all the way to the sharks at the end, they are very rare. Most of them have even less than 5 bones in total from both Iron Age and Late Bronze Age assemblages. And when we look at the distribution of the different kinds of fish in the Late Bronze Age compared to the Iron Age, we see that it's practically the same. We see in the Late Bronze Age, the local fish are 88% and the non-local fish are 86.3%. And this means that there was a clear preference for the inhabitants of the site to fish locally and not rely on imported fish. And this stands in sharp contrast to other sites in the southern Levant, where even sites that have a similar environment to Chatzor imported a much larger amount of fish. And the examples I want to show you are from Tel Rehov and Bet She'an, which are both located near the Jordan River and not very far from the Sea of Galilee. But at both of these sites, we see that the consumption of the local fish is very minimal here in the light green. It's very minimal in comparison to the consumption of the non-local fish, which are the blue fish. Dark blue is the Mediterranean fish or the marine fish, and the light blue are the Nilotic fish. And so this again stands in sharp contrast to the fish assemblage that we have from the early Bronze Age site of Bet Yerach. And here we see a site that is located directly on the shores of the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River. And in the early Bronze Age, we see that almost all of the bones, so 96.8% of the bones, are local, with very few marine fish and no Nilotic fish. And this is not surprising, however, because during the early Bronze Age, the trade in marine and Nilotic fish was not common and was not developed. And actually, this is the first evidence of non-local fish in an assemblage as of yet. And therefore, it's very logical that there are not many non-local fish in Bet Yarach, and that the people of the site relied on the fish that they can easily catch in the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River. So maybe not conclusions, but some suggestions in order to understand why we have mainly local fish at Chatzor. We showed today that the assemblage of fish bones from Chatzor is mainly local fish, that we have very few fish that were brought from faraway water bodies. And like we showed, this stands in sharp contrast to other sites that are located near freshwater body sources from the same period and that have a similar environment. So the question is, why did the inhabitants of Chatzor choose not to import fish and only rely on the local fish? So one possibility is that the trade route to bring fish to this inland site were not sufficient. However, we know that Chatzor is situated on a junction of trade routes, and therefore this is probably not the case. In addition, the Nile perch, which is this fish that you see right here, is found in large amounts of inland sites, such as Jerusalem and Lachish and Bet Shean and Rehov, like we saw before. And therefore, we know that the technology to bring these fish inland did exist at this time. And we also know that the routes to bring goods from both Egypt and the Mediterranean Sea to Chatzor also existed. I showed you before the Egyptian statues, and we also have large assemblages of pottery from Greece and Cypriot, the Mycenaean and Cypriot pottery of the late Bronze Age. So this is probably not the case. Another possibility is that in contrast to previous thought, Nile perch might not be a luxurious food. It is believed by most scholars that the importation of fish indicated consumption of luxurious foods, and that this would be something that defines the elites. However, in the fishbone assemblage that we showed from Chatzor today, this assemblage draws a completely different picture. It is possible that at Chatzor, the consumption of fish didn't reflect social status. It's also possible that at other sites, since we have such large amounts of Nile perch, actually, this can tell us that the Nile perch was not something that was very expensive to acquire. So this would not be a luxurious food and would not indicate high social status. In our opinion, it's actually the variety of fish in one specific context that could suggest such high status. So if I have a house that has fish from all around the Mediterranean, the Nile, and the local fish, this would be what would suggest high social status. But since only few private contexts of the late Bronze Age were sampled compared to public contexts, and in the Iron Age, only few public buildings were sampled in comparison to private contexts, it's still not possible to say if this is indeed the case. Another possibility is that the fishing techniques at Chatzor made fishing much easier. In contrast to Bet Shean and Rehov, who acquired their fish from rivers or from the sea, at Chatzor, most of the fish were acquired from the Hula Lake, which is essentially a swamp. And catfish, which we showed that make the largest part of the assemblage, catfish swim not very far from the surface of the water, and so it's much easier to catch them. So this might be due to technological differences. And lastly, it is also possible that there was some kind of ritual or religious or social restriction that was applied to the consumption of marine fish, or in other words, on the consumption of fish that are not fresh. Because in order to bring marine fish or melodic fish to Chatzor, these fish would need to be processed, either salted or dried or smoked. They needed to be processed in some kind of way. They can't arrive fresh to Chatzor. It's a long way, and fish don't remain fresh and they stink. On the other hand, fish from the Hula Lake are fresh fish and they could be consumed fresh. It's very nearby to the site. And this would also imply that the inhabitants of the site had a specific taste and they were not interested in changing their cuisine. And therefore, since Nile perch always appears at a site together with marine fish, it's possible to suggest that the fish merchants didn't arrive to Chatzor because there was no demand for fish, for marine or Nile perch fish. And this option could be tested if we had samples that were collected from cultic buildings where this would be expected to be emphasized. And luckily for us, this summer, we're going to excavate near the Orthostat temple in the lower city of Chatzor. This is a royal temple of the Middle Bronze Age and the Late Bronze Age. We're going to be able to continue our project of the fish and chips by examining some of the questions of the project and many other research questions that we have. We're going to use modern archaeological methods to retrieve more information on the people that lived at the site and the relationship with their environment, and especially with their fish. So thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much for the organizers of this session.
And thank you to Shlomit. Do I have any closing remarks?
Yes, I would like to thank all the presenters, the chairpersons, and especially Professor Asafi Landau, the head of the Institute, and of course, all of you, the attendees. We invite you all to follow us on Facebook and Instagram to see the members' work and research. See you next year and in the second annual meeting of our Institute. Goodbye and good evening from Israel. Bye-bye.